Sword in the Stone by T.H. White, Chapter 5. Sir Ector's home was called the Castle of the Forest Sauvage. It was more like a town or a village than any man's home. And indeed, it was the village during all times of danger. Whenever there was a raid or an invasion, everybody on the estate hurried into the castle, driving all the beasts before them into the courts, and there they remained until the danger was over. The little wattle and daub cottages nearly always got burned, and had to be built again afterwards with much profanity. For this reason it was not worthwhile troubling to have a village church, as it would constantly be having to be replaced. The villagers went to church in the chapel of the castle. They wore their best clothes and trooped up the street with their most respectable gait on Sundays, looking with vague and dignified looks in all directions as if reluctant to disclose their destination. And on weekdays they came to Mass and Vespers in their ordinary clothes, walking much more cheerfully. Everybody went to church in those days, and liked it. The castle of the Forest Sauvage is still standing, and you can see its lovely ruined walls with ivy on them, standing broached in the sun and wind. Some lizards live there now, and starving sparrows keep warm on winter nights in the ivy, and a barn owl dives methodically, hovering outside the little frightened congregations and beating the ivy with its wings to make them fly out. Most of the curtain wall is down, though you can trace the foundations of the 12 round towers which guarded it. They were round and stuck out from the wall into the moat, so the archers could fire in all directions and command every part of the wall. Inside the towers there are circular stairs. These go round and round a central column, and this column is pierced with holes for shooting arrows. Even if the enemy had got inside the curtain wall and fought its way into the bottom of the towers, the defenders could retreat up the bends of the stairs and shoot at those who followed them up, inside through those slits. The stone part of the drawbridge, with its barbican and bartizans of the gatehouse, are in good repair. These have many ingenious arrangements. Even if you got over the wooden bridge, which was pulled up so that you couldn't, there was a portcullis weighted with an enormous log which would squash you flat and pin you down as well. There was a large hidden trapdoor in the floor of the barbican, which would let you into the moat after all. At the other end of the barbican there was another portcullis, so that you could be trapped between the two and annihilated from above, while the bartizans, or hanging turrets, had holes in their floors through which the defenders could drop things on your head. Finally, inside the gatehouse, there was a neat little hole in the middle of the vaulted ceiling, which had painted tracery and bosses. This hole led to the room above, where there was a big cauldron for boiling oil and lead in. So much for the outer defenses. Once you were inside the curtain wall, you found yourself in a kind of wild alleyway, probably full of frightened sheep, with another complete castle in front of you. This was the inner shell keep, with its 8 enormous round towers which still stand. It is lovely to climb to the highest of them and lie there looking out toward the marches, from which all these old dangers came, with nothing but the sun above you and the little tourists trotting about below, quite regardless of arrows and boiling oil. Think for how many centuries that unconquerable tower has withstood. It has changed hands by succession often, by siege once, by treachery twice, but never by assault. On this tower the lookout hoved. From here he kept guard over the blue woods toward Wales. His clean old bones lie beneath the floor of the chapel now, so you must keep it for him. If you look down and are not frightened of heights, the Society for the Preservation of This and That have put up some excellent railings to preserve you from tumbling over. You can see the whole anatomy of the inner court laid out beneath you, like a map. You can see the chapel, now quite open to its God, and its windows of the great hall, with the solar over it. You can see the shafts of huge chimneys, how cunningly the side flues were contrived to enter them, and the little private closets, now public, and the enormous kitchen. If you are a sensible person, you will spend days there, possibly weeks, working out for yourself by detection which were the stables, which the mews, where were the cow byres, the armory, the lofts, the well, the smithy, the kennel, the soldiers' quarters, the priest's room, and my lords and ladies' chambers. And then it will all grow about you again. The little people, they were much smaller than we are, and it would be a job for most of them to get inside the few bits of their armor and old gloves that remain. Will hurry about in the sunshine. The sheep will baa as they always did, and perhaps from Wales there will come the f of the triple-feathered arrow, which looks as if it had never moved. The place was, of course, a complete paradise for a boy to be in. The wart ran about it like a rabbit in its own complicated labyrinth. He knew everything, everywhere, all the special smells, good climbs, soft lairs, secret hiding places, jumps, slides, nooks, larders, and blisses. For every season, he had the best place, like a cat. And he yelled and ran and fought and upset people and snoozed and daydreamed and pretended he was a knight, without ever stopping. Just now, he was in the kennel. People in those days had a rather different idea about the training of dogs to what we have today. They did it more by love than strictness. Imagine a modern MFH going to bed with his hounds. And yet Flavus Aranus says that it is the best of all that they can sleep with a person because it makes them more human, and because they rejoice in the company of human beings. Also, if they have had a restless night or been internally upset, you will know it, and they will not use them to hunt next day. In Sir Ector's kennel there was a special boy called the Dog Boy, who lived with the hounds day and night. He was a sort of head hound, and it was his business to take them out every day for walks, to pull thorns out of their feet, keep cankers out of their ears, bind their smaller bones that got dislocated, douse them for worms, isolate and nurse them in distemper, arbitrate their quarrels, and sleep curled up among them at night. If one more learned quotation can be excused, this is how the Duke of York, who was killed at Agincourt, described such a boy in his Master of Game. Also, I will teach the child to lead out the hounds to Scombri twice in the day, in the morning and the evening, so that the sun be up, especially in winter. Then should he let them run and play long in a meadow in the sun, and then comb every hound over after the other, and wipe them with a great wisp of straw. And this he shall do every morning, and then he shall lead them into some fair place where tender grass grows as corn, and other things that therewith they may feed themselves, as is to medicine for them. Thus, since the boy's heart and his business be with the hounds themselves become goodly and kindly and clean, glad and joyful and playful and goodly to all manner of folk, save to the wild beasts, to whom they should be fierce, eager, and spiteful. Sir Ector's dog boy was none other than the one who had had his nose bitten off by the terrible Wat. Not having a nose like humans, and being moreover subjected to stone-throwing by the other village children, he had become more comfortable with animals. He talked to them, not in baby talk like a maiden lady, but correctly, in their own growls and barks. They all loved him very much, and revered him for taking the thorns out of their toes, and came to him with their little troubles at once. He always understood immediately what was wrong, and generally he could put it right. It was nice for the dogs to have their God with them, in visible form. The wart was fond of the dog boy, and thought him very clever to be able to do all these things with animals, for he could make them do almost anything just by moving his hands. Well, the dog boy loved the wart in much the same way as his dogs loved him, and thought the wart was almost holy because he could read and write. They spent much of their time together, rolling about with the dogs in the kennel. The kennel was on the ground floor near the mews, with a loft above it, so that it should be cool in the summer and warm in the winter. The hounds were Allants, Gaze hounds, Limers, and Brotches. They were called Clumsy, Townier, Phoebe, Collie, Gerland, Talbot, Luath, Luffra, Apollon, Orthros, Bran, Gellert, Bounce, Boy, Lion, Bungie, Toby, and Diamond. The wart's own special one was called Cavil, and he happened to be licking Cavil's nose, not the other way about, when Merlin came in and found him. "This will come to be regarded as an unsanitary habit," said Merlin, "though I can't see it myself. After all, God made the creature's nose just as well as he made your tongue." "If not better," added the philosopher pensively. The wart did not know what Merlin was talking about, but he liked him to talk. He did not like the grown-ups who talked down to him like a baby, but the ones who just went on talking in their usual way, leaving him to leap along in their wake, jumping at meanings, guessing, clutching at known words, and chuckling at complicated jokes as they suddenly dawned. He had the glee of the porpoise in them. He had the glee of the porpoise then, pouring and leaping through strange sets. Shall we go out? Asked Merlin. I think it is about time that we began our lessons. The wart's heart sank at this. His tutor had been there a month, and it was now August, but they had done no lessons so far. Now he suddenly remembered that this was what Merlin was for, and he thought with dread of Sumule Logicus and of the filthy astrolabe, and he knew that it had to be borne, however, and got up obediently enough, after giving Cavil a last reluctant pat. He thought that it might not be so bad with Merlin, who might be able to make even the old Organon interesting, particularly if he would do some magic. They went out into the courtyard, into a sun so burning that the heat of haymaking seemed to have been nothing. It was baking. The thunderclouds, which usually go with hot weather, were there, high columns of cumulus with glaring edges. And there was not going to be any thunder. But there was not going to be any thunder. It was too hot even for that. If only, thought the wart, I did not have to go into a stuffy classroom, but could take off my clothes and swim in the moat. They crossed the courtyard, having almost to take deep breaths before they darted across it, as if they were going quickly through an oven. The shade of Gatehouse was cool, but the Barbican, with its close walls, was hottest of all. In the last dash across the desert, they achieved the drawbridge. Could Merlin have guessed what he was thinking about? And were staring down into the moat. It was the season of water lilies. If Sir Ector had not kept one section free of them for the boys' bathing, all the water would have been covered. As it were, about 20 yards on each side of the bridge were cut each year, and you could dive in from the bridge itself. The moat was quite deep. It was used as a stew, so that the inhabitants of the castle could have fish on Fridays. And for this reason, the architects had been careful not to let the drains and sewers run into it. It was stocked with fish every year. I wish I was a fish, said the wart. What sort of fish? It was almost too hot to think about this, but the wart stared down into the cool amber depths where a school of small perch were aimlessly hanging about. I think I should like to be a perch, he said. They are braver than the silly roach, and not quite so slaughterous as the pike. Merlin took off his hat, raised his staff of lingonum vitae politely into the air, and said slowly, Snarlum, snanemporek, artinoptem, dem, lil, yidnik, tepeka, sit, yob, sa, hush. Immediately there was a loud blowing of seashells, conches, and so forth, and a stout, jolly-looking gentleman appeared, seated on a well-blown-up cloud above the battlements. He had an anchor tattooed on his tummy and a handsome mermaid with Mabel written under her on his chest. He ejected a quid of tobacco, nodded affably at Merlin, and pointed his trident at Wart. The wart found he had no clothes on. He found that he had tumbled off the drawbridge, landing with a smack on his side in the water. He found that the moat and the bridge had grown hundreds of times bigger. He knew that he was turning into a fish. And that is where we will pause.